I see him described as a Kilkenny farmer. He's not, he's from the Midlands. He's from up around us. So Pat Hickey is, as I said earlier, not off the grass he licked it. This is a fantastic story of development of a family farm developing and working together cohesively as a family. And that's what I really like about this story, about that this is a strong family story. And I think there's lessons in it for a lot of us. So over to you, Pat.
Thanks very much, Mike. As Mike said, we kind of get confused. I think there was a few different descriptions of us. We were Kilkenny, Westmeath or Roscommon. I suppose, as you've heard, my name is Patrick Hickey, and I'm a little bit under more pressure here than normal. Normally, if I was doing something like this, I'd be just trying to convince you of my own lies. But I'm kind of conscious that I'm here representing, I suppose, 10 or 12 other individuals. So hopefully I'll be able to do them justice as we go along. Like any story, and ours is no different, I suppose we have to go back to the beginning. And ours begins with the birth of my father, Paddy, back in 1934. As you can see, we like to think we've inherited a lot of his more positive traits. Unfortunately, I missed out on the follicle one anyway. He's still, as you can see, in his 85th year with more hair, twice as much hair as I do anyway. If we're talking about dads and being born back in 1934, I suppose we have to go back to that time in the country, and it's a lot different to the place that we're all working and farming in today. Dad's formative years would have encompassed the period known as the emergency. And the emergency for our generation would be if we didn't get the Wi-Fi password when we were checking in today. But back then, it was completely different. Stable food items were being rationed. Sugar, cheese, tea. He says, Dad would have been conscious now that he came from a reasonable sized farm. As he says himself, they kind of had enough. Now that mightn't have included shoes at the time, but they had enough. But he would have been conscious that there was a level of people, neighbours, people they knew well, who were physically struggling to feed themselves and physically struggling to keep a roof over their head. But was also conscious that there was another layer of people who would have been seen as very well off at the time and in a different class structure. And I suppose Dad would have met his goal from the time he was able to walk to, by the time he'd finish, that he would be seen as equal to anybody else around at the time. So just going on through Dad and the previous generations, we call him. Dad started, he's the youngest of 7 and the youngest of 4 boys. So inheriting the home farm was never really an option that he became aware of fairly early. So at the age of 16 or 17, he moved across the parish to farm with an uncle of his. And circa 1951, I think he tells us he was younger, but I think around 21 or 2, he basically propositioned his uncle and told him that if he didn't hand over the farm, he was going to leave and follow an older brother and emigrate to America. Luckily enough for us, I suppose his uncle agreed, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, Dad would freely admit as well that time, as he said, the 50s and early 60s in Ireland, a very tough time to be farming, very little finance available, no money, as he'd say, in the country. He says that the difference the present generation has where we can access finance and we have the ability to grow our businesses, he said it was non-existent, and he said in hindsight he probably would have been as well off to leave the country for that period. But he did make one good decision. In the early 60s he met my mother Joan, and as you've heard numerous times, behind every good man there's an even better woman. Dad obviously recognised that fairly early in the time, and they got married in 1967. Mom said when she moved to Garnamana, there was 5 cows tied up in a timber byre. She was surprised by this because there was space for 12, and she set that as her first goal to fill the tie-up byre. The following year, 1968, they made their first land purchase, and the first of their 8 children, John, arrived. So we'll speed up and we'll come through some of the milestones, I suppose, from agriculture in Ireland. 1983/84 with the introduction of quotas. They were farming, they had acquired another 100 acres and were milking about 80 cows at that stage. And the first of us had decided, John had made the decision to stay at home and farm full time. If we speed up then to 2003, and I suppose this was a fairly contentious word when we were writing the paper. Dad never liked to be described that he'd retired. It was more due to a kind of stamp duty issues. Some of us were reaching the age of 35 that he had to take an official step back. But I was still very actively involved in the day-to-day farm and from decision-making's point of view. At that stage, both himself and Mam, with the help of some of us, had acquired and paid for and were working 500 acres completely owned. So it was a great achievement by the pair of them anyway. If we move on now to the current generation, at that stage in 2003, there was 4 of us full-time farming, John, Tom, myself and my younger brother Noel. Like most dairy farmers in general in Kilkenny at the time, we were running a mixed business, so we were milking what cows we had, constrained by quota, carrying all the followers to beef, and anything that was fit to be ploughed was in tillage. So we had about 250 acres of tillage at that stage. We were veering towards dairying, so my 2 older brothers, Tom and John, would probably be the last, well, definitely some of the last, if not the last, new entrants to dairying in Glanbia in the old quota regime. So around 94 and 97 respectively, they would have applied for quota, got to buy a certain amount, and then through access and priority categories for quota, all things that are foreign talk now to the present generation, availing of priority categories as regards flexi milk, and of trying to avoid super levy as best we could, we managed to build up cow numbers over that period. In 2003, there was 50 acres advertised for sale beside an out farm that we owned at the time, and myself and John, it was our first foray into the bank in our own rights. We bought that farm for 250,000, we borrowed the money over 5 years, and we managed to pay that back in 2. So I suppose that gave us confidence that we were on the right road. I suppose it gave the bank confidence too that we were well equipped to follow in our parents' footsteps, and I suppose and that led on to the following things, I suppose. So 2005, with the decoupling of the payments, it allowed us again to concentrate on what we could see as the future, which was dairying. As I said, focus on what was making the best returns. And at that stage, I suppose we were actively looking for an option. I suppose we were at that period in our lives where we were mad for road, mad to get going, and we had been looking around for an option to allow us to expand. And in about August that year, 2005, Ardnacraney Farm in County Westmeath was advertised. We went and looked at it, and we were lucky enough to purchase that farm in September of 2005. It was a big stepping stone in a number of ways. The reason we moved, I suppose, it was a one single block, about 255 acres. It had a large quota attached to it, which was fairly important at the time. It was about 1 million litres, and it had just begun to supply Connacht Gold, which you'd all know today as a Revo. So the purchase of further quota wouldn't be going to be such an issue. And I suppose it was the stepping stone that we needed to get in that we made the decision to move away from home. So moving on, before we go any further, I'll just give you an outline of the family structure as it is today. So there at the top, you'll see myself. I'm married to Elaine, and we have 3 kids, and we're working in partnership with my older brother, John. So we look after the Midlands operations, as Mike outlined, and John looks after the farms and the businesses in Kilkenny. Then there's my brother Tom. He's married to Monica. They have 5 children, and they are working in Tullaroan, County Kilkenny, a fully purchased farm, so half a farm that my dad had bought, and then Tom managed to extend it then around 2007. On the other side then, we have Noel and Emma, and they have 5 kids as well, and Noel is working on my father's home farm, so he inherited that from his uncle. And he's also taken on the long-term lease on a dairy farm outside Rathdowney in County Laois. Michael and Carl, I suppose I forgot to mention Michael, the youngest of the 5 of us. Michael went off and served his time as an electrician around 2004, 2005. As he said himself at the time, there was lots of work, but getting paid was always an issue. He was going out with Carl at the time, and Carl's parents had a large enough farm that was leased out. It was a typical tillage and beef farm in Kilkenny. Around 2009, he approached my brother John to see could he come work with him to get a bit of experience. And following on from that, in 2011, they took out the lease on Carl's parents' farm and converted it to dairying. So at the moment, they just had their 5th son there about a week ago, so they have 5 boys as well. We're good fertility anyway. And they're doing their bit for the labour issues going forward. So they're working on Michael and Carol's home place, and between Noel and Michael, in 2016 they bought a farm, well, it was a bear farm outside Ballacalla in County Laois. They developed that in 2017 and they've just finished their first full year in production there. So this is just a list of what's happened since 2003. We'll just focus on some of the major ones. As I said, in 2005, Westmeath, and as I was trying to explain, I suppose we'd be talking to lads involved in the land mobility, and they were saying like there's lots of options out there for young lads, but there's nobody prepared to move. Everybody wants the farm that's 3 minutes or 5 minutes down the road. And I suppose at the time, as I said, we were mad keen for road, we were mad to go. I was going to do something, I suppose, in fairness to Elaine. It was a bigger decision for her. She luckily enough, she followed me up anyway. So once we had got up there, I suppose it opened up the bits around the Midlands. 2007, Ballintarsna is the other farm, the other half of the farm that Tom and Monica purchased. Moving down then, 2012, that's Fort View in County Roscommon. So as I said, if we hadn't been in Westmeath, we probably wouldn't have looked at that farm. Purchased that farm in the end of 2012. That's a 330-acre farm. There was 214 acres put up for sale and an option to long-term lease the other 110, which we've done. Down along then Ballacalla, 2016, that's the farm that my two brothers are working in partnership with. And the one down at the bottom then is a farm that has come up in about 5 minutes away from our farm in Roscommon. We purchased that in October, and we'll be taking possession of that in April of 2019. The plan is to put replacements on it for the moment and maybe look to developing it if other land became available down the line. The average price on that paid is about 10,800 overall. Some of the farms that were bought during the early stages of the Celtic Tiger would have cost a bit more, but on average that's what it's costing. The farms leased then, as Michael's, that's 2011. That's the farm where Michael and Carol are farming on. Fort View is the 110 acres that we have tacked on to the farm in Roscommon. Rathdowney is the lease farm that Noel is milking on, and that's the 125 acres that we got just down the road from us in Westmeath, and that's costing on average about €190 an acre. Some of you might think that sounds cheap, but I suppose you have to factor in that we've put a lot of our own capital into developing them and getting them up to speed to milk cows off them. So this is what we're working today between all the units, just short of 1,060 hectares farmed. To get that up to the stocking rate, we'll be milking somewhere just short of 2,200 cows in 2019. Milking platform of 827 hectares in 9 different units. So I suppose we have to say that over the last 10 years, we probably started with 5 different greenfield units. And I suppose we'll see later on from a labour point of view, I suppose we've been focusing on getting operations that are fairly labour efficient. And in 2012 in Roscommon, or in 2013 when we were developing it, we took the first step to put in a roastery, and we'd see huge advantages from a labour point of view. We have a number of large herringbone parlours. We'd be working in a good few 24 units, which we think is the ideal size for a one labour unit operation, and multiply that by 10. If we're looking at anything over 250 cows, we would seriously recommend people to consider going the roastery route. As you heard earlier on today, I was sitting down listening to the lads' talk, Brendan Horn earlier on. We're obviously average on everything, so we stock around 2.67 cows a hectare overall. We have flirted with going higher, particularly when we moved to Westmeath, and like the lad said this morning, we fell off the other side of the knife edge, working harder and making less money than we did the year before, just putting the whole system under pressure. So Dad would have always told us, stock at a cow to the acre and you'll never be under pressure. And sure, we thought, sure, he's old, we'd know better than him. But it's amazing what your parents do actually know. I suppose this is a different type of a slide. Expertise or education. To say we haven't had an unconventional education would be an understatement. We haven't a leaving cert or a degree between the 5 of us. But from a point of view that we've always been allowed, and I suppose we're hearing it this morning, and I suppose all these things we've taken for granted. From the time we were old enough, we were allowed to sit in at the kitchen table when my father or my mother were meeting bank managers, accountants, solicitors, auctioneers, and if you think that they made 12 different purchases over their time period, there was a lot of meetings going on. And if you think that on average we were farming full-time from 14 or 15 years of age, we were sitting in on these meetings, I suppose, from the age of 8 or 9 or 10. And different, I hear this morning now, they were saying having set meetings. There was no set meetings in Garnamana. Financial issues were openly discussed at breakfast, dinner and table. Everybody was aware of the capital requirements or the repayments that had to be made. We all understood the financial implications it had for the family. And I suppose it was something, when you see the next two lines, financial discipline and work ethic, there were probably two lessons that we'd learned very early in life. Another way that our house probably differed from the average family farm, there would never been any negativity in relation to agriculture or farming in general. From the time we could walk, Dad would have always insisted to us, whatever you wanted to achieve, it was there for you, and all you had to do was be prepared to work. And it was something that we took on board, and along with the financial discipline that we learned, and I suppose like any lesson that you learn that young, it seems to be imprinted on your mind, and it's something we've carried forward, and there would be the cornerstones, I suppose, of the success we've had subsequently to that. The other thing that would be remiss not to mention, I suppose, and it's something we take for granted as well, is the massive family support network that we have. So if you consider that, in the slide earlier on, there's 6 separate family entities involved in this business. As I was saying to some of the lads earlier on, they wouldn't believe me, I'm the only one of the 5 that's a member of a discussion group or that regularly attends conferences such as this or open days or farm walks. But at this stage, the lads nearly have their own discussion group at home. And I suppose there's massive support there. They don't realise it, but they can talk. They're talking to each other 2 or 3 times every day. It would also be remiss to say, I suppose, we learned another thing from our parents in that we've been lucky enough to tie down 4 women that have been a huge support to the business since they came on board. Been very supportive of the paths that we're taking, and at this stage now, the 4 girls would be very involved from a day-to-day and hands-on in all the operations that they're involved in. So financing the growth. The first thing to state here again, very unconventional. We only borrow to purchase land, so everything else, so that's cows, buildings, machinery, land development, soil fertility, upgrades, whatever, is done from our own pockets. We do that from cash flow. You might ask, how is that possible when we don't do cash flow budgets? We wouldn't have the highest EBI cows. We're not growing near as much grass as Pat has outlined earlier on. And in fairness, the 4 lads at home don't even bother measuring grass. I suppose we've built up a system in that, from this point of view, it helps us in 2 different ways. I suppose the fact that we're putting our own money into this business, we're fairly conscious when we're doing a deal for a machine or a building that we're getting a good deal. We're putting in the minimum amount. Now, I'm not saying we would have cut corners in the past, and we've learned some mistakes from that. But we're very conscious that we're getting value for money and we're getting a labour-efficient job when we're finished. It also means that we have to be running reasonably high-margin businesses, so we're conscious, as I said, that our cost structure is kept in order so that no matter what happens, and we've seen it this year, the lads would be all based around Kilkenny and Laois, which would have been very badly hit with the drought, that it was a fodder crisis, it wasn't a financial crisis, because our business is fairly solid, because we have thrown off a reasonable margin no matter what the price. So as I said, we'd like to think we're running low risk, reasonably high margin businesses, and we don't deviate from the tried and trusted. So we're running simple, consistent systems that are fairly easily replicated. We're all doing the same thing. We take this for granted, but apparently it doesn't happen everywhere. All the farms are spring calving. They might vary a week or 10 days from the start, depending on whether it's Kilkenny or Roscommon. We're attempting to match stock and rate to the grass grown, and we're hitting somewhere on average over all the farms, as I said, stocked about 2.6 to 2.7 cows to the hectare. We're not pushing it going mad at all. I suppose we're only carrying dairy stock, so all male calves go out the gate at 2 weeks plus or as soon as we can get them out, and we carry all replacement heifers through. So this allows us a bit of flexibility in that if an option comes up, we have the stock to stock it. We have replacements or we have stock for sale. So we would have been selling a good few in-calf heifers down through the years. I suppose the system as we describe it, from a supplement point of view, we feed silage in the winter, we feed supplement when it's required, and we feed as much grazed grass in between as we can physically get into the cows. We're stocked on average when we worked it out. It's not something that the lads think about a lot, but we worked it out about 180 livestock units per labour unit. And that maybe on paper would look high, but as I said, we're very conscious that the buildings and the systems we're working in are as labour efficient as possible, and it allows us to get through a fair amount of work per person involved. I suppose we've always concentrated on what we were good at. I suppose if you think back to the slide, we started this expansion ourselves in 2003. 2005, a lot of people were getting sidetracked off the beaten track. They were being told at certain things that they were a lot better to go invest their money in off-farm investments or shares or whatever and get a better return than what you'd get from your farm. We were never distracted. We didn't follow that stampede. We concentrated on what we knew to be a reasonable good business that gave us a reasonable return, and we focused, and I think it stood the test of time for us. Our cows we'd like to think we have a reasonably fertile cow. Average EBI in the Midlands would be around 130. I didn't ask the lads at home what they are, but all very similar. At this stage, it would be a reasonably percentage of crossbreeding through them. Probably at that crossroads now where we're going back with a lot more black and white semen across that animal. About 270 plus days at grass. As I said, she's a reasonably high EBI, and at the present crossbred, but probably going more black and white. The last 3 years in the Midlands operations, even though we've been growing numbers year on year, we've averaged about 460 kilos sold, that's just short of 1,200 kilos per hectare, feeding about 700 or 800 kilos per head, if I'm allowed to say that. Obviously, some marginal milk there. So these are the figures. 17, I'm sorry now I'm not up to OFA on kilos milk solid, so I had to stick in the cent per litre. We put in 2017 and I said we'd stick in 2018. As everyone here knows, 2017 was probably an exceptional year profit-wise. So these again are the Midlands operations figures. We've been doing profit monitors for the 13 years since we moved up. The lads in Kilkenny's don't do financial figures, but vis-a-vis would be very similar to the operations that they're running. If anything, would have lower costs in that they do a little bit more work themselves, wouldn't have as high as contractor charges. So gross output, 40.9. Feed is reasonably standard there, 2.09. We would have between 2 and 3 cents on average. And labour, 3.18. So that's all paid labour in the Midlands, bar myself and Elaine. We have 3 full-time labour units and would have taken on a bit of casual labour in the spring. We have Robert Swerge, he's a Polish national. Robert is with us over 11 years in the Midlands at this stage. He's quite comfortable. I can switch off the phone when I go away. We have the Roscommon. Up to this was a 2 labour unit and with a night carver in the spring. Brendan Elliott was our farm manager there. Brendan finished with us at Christmas after 5 years. He's gone out and taken on his own place, and we're delighted to see him progressing. It leaves a bit of a hole for us to fill, but it's great to see somebody coming in and progressing to a stage where they have the confidence to go on and do it for themselves. So total cost in 2017 was just over 19 cents, leaving a net profit of 21.8. 2018 then, milk price just slightly down on the gross output. You can see the big difference in feed. Everybody talks about the summer, and I suppose for us, particularly the spring was probably more of an ordeal. We had done a lot of damage on the last rotation, finishing up in 2017. Ground completely different to this back end, just never got to heal or dry out. And we were putting cows out on healing paddocks that spring and did a lot of damage. And it affected us into the drought in that the ground went from shit to brick, I think is the description in New Zealand, and really hit us on growth during the summer then as well. Labour, as I said, we put in a night carver and a bit more casual labour at home, so that lifted our labour costs a little bit. And interest is that servicing all the borrowings in the Midlands. So you can see the big lift in our cost there was mostly from a feed point of view, and we'd be hoping that we can, with God willing, we can correct that with a normal weather year going forward into 2019, leaving a net profit there of 14.3. So on average, over the 5 years since we've taken on Roscommon, the gross output is somewhere around just short of 37, 36.9, and our total costs, I said, including servicing and all paid labour, is just short of 21.5 cent average over that 5-year period. So that's given us somewhere, it says 7/5, it's just over 800 euros profit per cow, about 2,100 per hectare, and that margin has to cover our capital repayments, tax and drawings. So from a tax point of view, we're all operating now in limited companies, so it gives clarity, I suppose, from a tax point of view. You're not worrying at the end of the year. We have a fair idea going forward what we have to pay. And drawings, I'd like to think we don't have fantastic, massive lifestyles. We keep drawings would be fairly low, I suppose, relative, and it allows a lot of capacity there to repay capital. So again, you're probably saying, how was he asked to speak here? These are things that we do not focus on, but we did it up for the benefit of showing that it's possible. On average, on all the new developments, about just over 13,000 per cow would be spent. So that's what the price is buying the land and putting the stock in, putting up the buildings, developing it. Some fluctuate, some, as you've heard earlier on, from tithe, some farms we've purchased or leased would have existing buildings, some wouldn't. I suppose the positive from our point of view is we've worked out, and that was actually on this year's 6.6% return on capital, which basically goes to show that the land is financing itself. As I said, that 3,000 euros on top for development is probably our own money, but even at that, at 6.6% return, we're self-financing on the new land. And the 16.5 again on last year's on 2018's performance, we were very happy. Well, as I said, it's not something that we're focusing on, but it shows that we're making a reasonable return, and I suppose that's why the banks, in fairness to them, are happy enough to keep supporting us when we come to them with an option. Overall, we're running at about 50%, and that's including the debt we're about to take on for the new farm, 50% debt ratio. As you've seen in some of the previous slides, around 5,000 a cow. That fluctuates up and down. Another thing groups would ask when they come to us, like, how do the banks keep funding us? And the one thing I'd say on it, and it's for any young people here starting off, we'd set an awful lot of seam on our track record, and I presume the banks do too. So we've never missed a repayment or had to restructure a debt in that time. And I suppose that gives them great confidence that, I suppose it was something we learned from when we were young. Dad would have always focused that this was the date and the repayments had to be made, and we often heard the description that the checkbook was closed, there was no more spending, and I suppose that's something that we've carried through with us, that, and to this day, like, we still haven't, touch wood, haven't had to restructure as yet. The future, this is a funny slide to put together too, and so I suppose doing this project has allowed us to have a little bit of kind of look back or look forward, as again, we don't do any 5 or 10-year plans. Any opportunity that presents itself, we take them as they come. I heard Mike talking about taking the walk up the Devil's Bit. I'd say if I said that to my brothers at home, they'd be wondering what was on the other side. There'd be no pint going up for no reason. So I suppose basically I said that to them, I'm sure they're happy at what they're doing. I suppose people might think, Jesus, they work so hard, but we genuinely love what we're doing. And I suppose if we can get anything across here today, I suppose that's it. When you drive in or walk onto a greenfield site, you kind of have a vision in your head what it's going to look like. And to see that taking shape and developing, and to be honest, the last 2 or 3 or 4 probably have outperformed or exceeded our best expectations. And that gives great satisfaction. I suppose you can see in the picture there the family. All the farms are built around their own family networks, and I suppose we've seen the benefits of that. As I said, there was never anything, only positivity when we were growing up, and you could see with our mother and father working together on the unit what was possible, and I suppose that's something we're all taking forward. As regards sticking with the proven system, I suppose if it's not broken, why fix it? A lot of people would put an awful lot of sweat and energy into trying to ascertain that last 3 or 4 or 5%. We probably see there's more to be gained in looking for the next opportunity than trying to get that last 1/4% profitability there. From a point of view of assessing opportunities, I'd often say to people, at the moment, we're not actively looking for things. We'll assess things as they arise. From an affordability point of view or return, there's probably 2 different types. So if there's something becomes up that's available beside an existing plot, well, sure, then it has a different level of affordability or a price that we're willing to go to. And I suppose that's the other thing, like people probably think this is crazy. Like we've lost out on more farms than we've got because we don't go out to spend silly money because this has to return. There's no pot of gold that's sitting at the back of the rainbow for us. Everything has to pay for itself, and affordability is an important part of that. So as I said, we've always would, when we walk a farm or assess something, we'd have the meeting around the table, whichever house is closest to it. People would be asked for their opinion on it, and a level that we're happy enough to go to would be set at that. So as I said, if there's a bit that can be tacked on to an existing setup, that's fair enough. At this stage, if we're looking at a greenfield opportunity, we probably would be looking for scale, and that's no big issue there, I suppose. We probably have seen the benefits from a point of view of the rotary parlours. Everything from now on is going to be fully worked by labour. My dad, I don't know where we were after walking the farm, and they were having one of these meetings around the table, and the issue of labour came up, and there was nobody saying anything, and Dad kind of coughed his throat, and well, he says, we can all do the work of 2 men, and after that we're effed. And that was, and I think, and I suppose going forward, people will be looking at the challenges we're facing. I suppose, like every farmer here in the room, I suppose labour is an issue. At this stage, if you divide it up over the 9 units, and with one of the lads nearly on each of them, but we're at a level now but we're also moving into an age bracket. John turned 50 this year, so I suppose we're getting to a stage where they physically won't be able to do as much. We're going to have to move away. And I spoke at the Labour conference earlier in the year, and one of the things I would have said, I'd never ask anybody to do anything that we wouldn't be prepared to do ourselves. And up to this, staff would be happy enough with us because we were down in the trenches with them, and I suppose that'll be the next challenge for us to lift, to go to the next step in that, where we're managing labour and maybe managing the business rather than be physically involved. I suppose last but not least then is the next generation, integrate them. I wanted to put Mum and Dad have 27 grandkids at this stage. We're fairly hopeful, Jesus, surely some of them will come on after us. And I've heard that numerous times since I moved to the Midlands. The twins were born in 2015, and they said, God, you're sorted now, you have one for both farms. And my answer is it's the same today as it was then. They might never farm. It'll be hard enough for them to avoid it, but they mightn't farm. But in fairness, if they get half the enjoyment out of the journey, both myself and Elaine have experience, and that's growing up in Kilkenny in 2 large farms, being involved in the community locally, I suppose making the decision to move to Westmeath from a business point of view more than anything else. Like we weren't coming up here for the social end of things, and moving up, meeting the challenges that entailed, growing a business, seeing it improve. I said if they have half the enjoyment that we're after having on our journey, they'll have had a great life. And I suppose the big plus that we've found since we moved to the Midlands, and it was something that we weren't looking for, is the friends we've made. And we've made friends for life. I'd say both myself and Elaine can say that. So I'd say that to anybody out there that's contemplating leaving home to go try and progress them. These are the things that nobody factors into a financial budget, and these are the positives that people won't tell you are there, but definitely all I can say is the positives. And that's not to say, I had one of my sisters telling me, be honest, Pat, tell them about the bad times. And there has been ups and downs, but on a scale, the ups would outweigh the bad days. So with that, I'd say thanks very much, and sure we'll try and answer any questions you have.
That certainly should have got your questions going. I hope you now respond to the two Pats with questions. Have we got any volunteers? Yep, anybody? Okay, while they're thinking, okay, we'll come to you now in a second, John. Pat, I was intrigued with your reference to the drop in the K, and it's something that Stan Lawler dealt with at the Grassland Conference. When you're taking off silage, the impact it has on dropping K. Maybe you could just deal with that for a moment.
Yes.
Come on.
Yeah, so like Stan was saying that two bales of silage is the equivalent of 1,000 gallons of watery slurry. So we try to go out in every paddock we take bales off with slurry, and but a focus for us will be to make better use of the slurry we have on the farm coming into the future too, which is like we don't top paddocks anymore, so we're not leaving that grass behind us to rot away. It's been baled and taken off the paddock, so there's a bit more of an emphasis there to put K back into the paddock.
Yeah, I think it's a point worth that draw of nutrients that happens with you every year. You're harvesting nutrients off your soil, so it's a good point. And given that you're returning all the slurry to the grazing platform, it shows that it's still having a draw on it. So you really have to work on your NPs and Ks, or Ps and Ks particularly. John, yeah?
Yeah, congrats to the two Pats. A question for Pat Walsh. Exceptional tonnage there over the last 5 years. What does nitrogen contribute to that tonnage, and what's your choice of nitrogen? And does clover come into the equation at all?
Yeah, so as regards nitrogen, we try to have somewhere between 90 and 100 units out before the 1st of April or early April, and then follow the cows at a unit a day after that or thereabouts. Mostly it's been urea with sulphur as well, so that's the main product we'll be using. And as regards clover, we're still spreading the same amount of fertilizer since before we had the clover. Since we put the clover in, we haven't really.
So, but you do have clover. You purposely put in clover into your mixes.
The whole herd has been, or the whole farm has been oversown with clover in 2016. Yeah.
And what impact have you seen? Just to follow up on John's point.
There hasn't been a huge visible impact. Like there was 3 paddocks we had before we put the clover in. Every time you let the cows into those paddocks, there would be a huge increase in the tank as regards fat and protein. You don't see as big a variation anymore, so I'm assuming we're getting a bit of a kick on our fat and protein with the clover.
Good, and certainly palatability and use, you'd feel.
Yeah, no, there had.
Would you reckon you're getting 85% utilisation?
Depends on the year. We're averaging over 80% anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, just a follow-on comment on the clover. I will say that I regularly hear in New Zealand, and I'd hear a bit in Missouri as well. Free draining farms will say that where drought is a regular feature. K is often called the poor man's irrigation, and in that situation would certainly go higher than the recommendations in the Irish type situation. Coupled with that, we'll say that if you want to grow clover, I'd say, we'll say, and it's beginning to come back a lot more on the better farms in New Zealand. They're tending again to use more K, and we'll say that I'd see, some farms that are pretty heavily stocked, and they're down to 70 or 80 units of nitrogen now an acre, but always accompanied by, if you like, the K will say. It's probably something now. When do we get a drought? I think the last decent one was before 18 was 1995. But that if on a farm like the Welch's now, that's probably as free draining just about as anything in the country, it's probably one to have a look at.
Yeah. Okay. The K story again. Anybody else? Are you all afraid of Pat Hickey because in case he might buy your farm if you ask him a question? Aidan?
Yeah, it's for Pat Hickey. Pat, explain a little bit how you assess an opportunity, both for, let's say there's a farm for sale and for lease. How do you know how much money to pay for it, whether to buy it or to lease it?
First of all, Aidan, I'm going to reply to you by I think it was Sheehan earlier on, when you have to say, remember how to say no. So next time you ask me to do something like this, I'm going to say, I'll think about it. As regards affordability, as we said, we stock at a cow to the acre. I was trying to explain this to me Teagasc advisor. We'd work on an average run-of-the-mill cow at 5,000 litres. Stocked at a cow to the acre, and the profitability we're making, which is averaging somewhere, our costs, somewhere around 15 cents. What that's able to service, if that's able to service it, we'll put in the buildings, and that's how we value it. After that, it's accessibility. Before the lads purchased Ballacalla, they would have went farther afield. They could have been neighbours of some of the people here. They would have looked, I suppose they were at a different level, and that myself and Elaine, we actually weren't married when we moved to Tang. The lads were married, they had kids, so they had set up routes where they were. They needed to get something that was within a driving distance, a realistic driving distance. So I suppose that's how we value it. It's very simple. There's no massive, it'll fit on the bottom of this, the paper here. And that's been built up over, and that's average, over 13 years. We've seen exceptionally good years like 17. We've seen not so good years like 2018, but we're still making what we call a fairly solid margin. And those returns were on 18 figures. So, like I'd say to everybody, and we've had lots of new entrants to dairy and come to look at what we're doing or whatever, and all I'd say to everybody is, sure, on its worst day, it's going to be an awful lot better than anything else you can do. So that's all.
Yeah, and I think there's another point we should continue to emphasise, and Pat made it in his presentation, the banks, and being honest with your bank and having a good relationship with your bank. And I think that's certainly something that Pat would bear out. Okay, there's one over here.
Just a question for Pat Hickey. Your debt ratio there at 50%, it's respectable looking. But I'd say you're sort of a fella that'll borrow money, you know, you'd be fond of it, I'd say. So, given that interest rates are so historically low, does it ever bother you that, you know, we're at the lowest in 400 years or whatever, that, you know, any little jip up at all might have a profound effect, or would it? Or does it concern you? Or you're maybe asleep at night anyway?
Well, this has come up a few times, and I actually did the grassland walk in 2007 when I was at my really invigorated youthful self and not knowing all the pitfalls that were ahead of us. But that question came up we bought the farm in 2005 and moved up into a mobile home in 2006. That January, myself and Elaine were up on a Sunday, and the first of the heifers that we had landed was going to calf that night. So I had to drive back to Kilkenny and drop off Elaine. There was no electricity or heating or anything in the mobile, so I came back armed with my bedside lamp, an electric blanket and a bottle of water, and that was probably the only night I didn't sleep in Westmeath since. Dad would have always told us if borrowing or if debt is going to keep you awake at night, well, don't borrow money. And another good friend of the family, he passed away a number of years ago, would have always said that buying farms, the only thing you need to buy farms is practice. And I suppose that's something we inherited, we saw a lot of when we were younger. And I suppose all those things in together, to be honest, it's a bit like the capital repayments. We had to sit down and work out how much we were borrowed. We don't really consider it. Debt is something that's there in the background. Once we know what we have to meet every year, we know when those payments are coming up. Once that's there, no more than this year. Like if we sat down and totted up what this summer is after costing the boys overall to keep the cows fed last summer, to feed them again through this winter, sure it would be astronomical. But it's another, and I said interest rates rising would be something similar. So it's just something, that bump that we'd have to negotiate on the road.
Okay, Andrew, up here in the middle. Yeah, while the microphone is coming to him, there first, I live about 14 miles from the Roscommon farm, and when he bought it, somebody said, "You know that Hickey fella?" And I said, "I do, yeah, why?" He said, "He's after buying a farm in Roscommon, he must be stone mad, it wouldn't feed snipe." Anyway, if you should see it today, my son Mick reckons it's the nicest farm in the country. So it's that kind of a farm, really good farm. I'm going to take the one over here first. Yep.
Yeah, so well done to both speakers, two fantastic examples of family businesses that are growing, and that's where my question is. So what would be your maybe top 3 tips for successfully building a family business? Because I think you know, there's brilliant examples of an Irish dairying, and there's nothing better than a family business working well. But I think on the other side, there's nothing worse than a family business where people aren't pulling together and there's a lot of conflict. So what would be maybe give me 2 or 3 top tips each you think have been most important to successfully growing the family business?
Okay, Pat Hickey, Pat Walsh first, seeing his father's looking at him.
Yeah, well, I suppose the main thing I'd look at is openness and honesty between everyone in the business, and just that everyone's on the same wavelength and working towards the same goal would be the main one for me. As regards the second one, I can't even think off the top of my head now for a second one.
It's probably a really good one that covers everything. Pat Hickey?
Should we be the same? I suppose I was just saying it to Mike earlier on, you know, all the pieces that we've heard earlier on today, we found out we're average because we're stocked at an average rate, and we do all these things like second nature. I suppose people talk about having a succession meeting. These were going on in our house around the kitchen from the time we sat at home. Dad would have always told us that as the next bit came up, well, you're this and this is yours. For stamp duty reasons, we probably would have signed to it and the farm would have been paying for it. So everybody knew from day dot where we were heading and what road we were going down. So there was never, and when that day came then in 2003, when it was being just, we were signing to it, there was no arguments. And I suppose we take it for granted, as I said, you know, until we sat down to do this, the fact that there's 5 brothers plus my parents plus wives and all very supportive of what everybody else is doing. It's because of that, and there was never anything hidden from anybody. And I suppose if there's one lesson we take from the previous talk and from today, maybe go home and be more open about what's going on a day-to-day basis. A family, other than that, I suppose all I could say, Paddy, is what we've seen at home would be both parents being committed. No, I don't, and I'm not saying that everyone has to be working full-time on the farm, but being committed to what's going on and going in the one direction. I often heard a quote that the best way to succeed, as someone in New Zealand said, it was meeting the right partner, and that I can't underestimate. That's something that you'd have to put well up there. So that's what it's
Okay, very good. Andrew?
Just following on from that, have you got a clear succession vision amongst you brothers? You know, and what happens if like Karen Dempsey's story, something tragically did happen to one of you? Have you got anything in place to cover for the other brother's family, or if something untoward should happen?
I suppose all I can say on that is I have a will. Probably needs to be updated. We all have wills. I'm farming in partnership with John, so I can't really speak for any of the rest of the lads. As myself and Elaine, we're not paying into a private pension. As we say, we're working on our pension, and I suppose you'd have to ask Elaine whether she'd sell up and move back home to Kilkenny or not, whether that would be what she would do. Realistically, as regards succession, and I've had this discussion actually with a few lads in our own discussion group, I think the biggest challenge for the present generation of farmers is going to be how they handle the next generation. Looking back, and as I try to put it across, the biggest ended enjoyment for us has been in the doing. So the development of this business and seeing it grow. We're now, there's a generation of young fellas in their mid-20s coming home to businesses that are top of the range, hitting all the targets. I would find that boring, and I don't see where the challenge is there for the next generation. They're just clocking in, they're doing their day's work, and they're clocking out. So I suppose it's easier for me because we don't have that historical attachment built in. The land we're farming hasn't been in the family for generations. I would like to think that if any of our subsequent generation are farming, that they'll go away and make it on their own. I'd have no problem if we're in a position to do it, to guarantee whatever loans they'd want to take on. But I couldn't see the challenge for them coming back. As I said, myself and Elaine didn't move to the Midlands. We weren't even married. Kids weren't on the horizon. We didn't move for the kids. We moved for ourselves. And I think the best thing for the next generation will be to do the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, have we got anybody else? Mike? Anyone besides Mike Murphy? Sorry, and then down the back.
Quick question for each of the Pats, Pat Walsh. Averaging over 17 tonnes. Can you explain why the country average is only 10 tonnes? And a question for Pat Hickey. 13,000, including everything, land, stamp duty, stock, machinery, buildings, etc., the fencing, whatever. It's a very low figure will say that I mean, I've actually seen your costs on one farm, and you do an extraordinary job, will say that in terms of converting things very cost effectively. What do you prioritise, what do you actually think? I mean, you've mentioned rotaries, and you explained, will say, that how you go about that one. Other things, will say, and that's one question. Second question is, will say, that how do you actually keep the costs so low?
Okay, do you want to start, Pat, on your question first?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to look at this is you look at lime and how cheap it is, and it's probably one of your cheapest inputs into the soil fertility, and how much soil in Ireland is deficient in lime is probably one way of looking at why the national average is so low. Another thing is, like, we're getting cows out early, we're spreading fertilizer early, we're getting extra rotations, we're averaging 12 rotations in 2017, which is probably another way of looking at why we're growing so much more.
Yeah, and probably allied to that, Pat Hickey was saying his brothers don't measure, but I guarantee they're getting 10, 11 rotations as well. So it's, you know, it's down to that use thing, I would think. But Pat, do you want to take your part of the question?
Priorities, I suppose, once we get in there, is to lay out the farm, get a design map on our head. As regards, I suppose, I have to be careful who I'm going to insult here now or whatever, but I suppose from the Rotary point of view, and I think he's in the audience, I was chatting to him earlier on, we would have went up, we would have had, as I said, a 30-pint herringbone in Westmeath. When we moved to Roscommon, the opinion would have been to put in a 36 with removers. And Bertie Troy came up to look at the farm with us. Bertie was an agent for Milfoss at the time. And Bertie kind of said to us, would we consider a rotary? And we laughed and we said, because we would have a budget. And like, this is what I'm saying, people wonder why you focus your mind. When you're spending your own money, and you know you have, and in ways, in some bits of development, we've been penny wise and pound foolish, and it's come back to bite us, but we've got to where we are, and we'd say the next one we'll have a little bit more. And we didn't think it was a runner at all until we'd done a bit of investigation into it. At the time, we were very, very lucky in that I think the companies were falling over each other to get the first rotary into the west of Ireland, and we hammered out an exceptionally good deal at the time, and now they're cursing themselves because we're using that platform as we go across. And but the parlour was the first thing we put into Roscommon, and I suppose it's following on maybe from the things this morning. We put in the winter accommodation, so we carried the heifers over there, moved them back to not so labour efficient winter accommodation the first year, put up the cubicle house the following summer while we were milking there. Again, there wasn't a lot going on. This was 2012. Builders were anxious to get in, anxious to do the work. We had the abilities of scale, or the cost effectiveness of scale. It was a large development and lads were very keen to get in. And we roofed it against all known advice at the time. We've had a couple of young farm manager groups up, and they couldn't see the justification for putting the roof over it. And the fellow that was working the number 2 there at the time had his arms crossed, now past no remarks, and he basically said, well, they haven't been here on a fucking cold February morning. So we were lucky enough, we paid for all that out of cash flow that year. We had a good year, milk year in 2014. Subsequently got slightly hit with a super levy, so one balanced out the other, I suppose. But we prioritise, I suppose, short, long answer to a short question, getting it up and running and getting milking. We would keep everything, Mike, as cheap as we can. We've had to upgrade all the roadways since, so we basically went in, stripped out the topsoil, put in a bit of fill that was available on the farm. All these things, as I said, looking back, maybe we were pound wise, penny wise, pound foolish. And how do we keep our costs so low? We roll on those, and I suppose there's been a lot of negativity to the Greenfield here this morning. Greenfield was very advantageous to the like of us in getting prices for setting up new developments, and we just rolled them on. And in fairness, the development in Balacolla didn't cost any more than what we spent in Roscommon, even though it was 5 or 6 years down the line.
Okay, down at the back.
Yeah, Mike, just for the two Pats, two questions. First of all, like we heard from this morning, like, you know, the challenges from last year. I'd just like to ask both Pats, what would they reckon are their key learnings from 2018? And secondly, what are their views, given their scale of operation has increased significantly in the past few years, what are their views on fixed milk price options from their co-ops?
Okay, interesting. Pat, we'll give you first go.
I forgot the first one.
What's your lesson from 2018?
Oh, lesson from 2018. Go on holidays for a month, that's what I did. No, like, just forget about complicated systems, set the rotation out as long as you can and feed the cows what you have to feed them. There's no point in trying to overcomplicate things, and just ride it out and hope for the best, really. There's not much more you can do.
And you obviously fed quite a bit more. What's your plan for this year with regard to what you learned last year? Are you changing anything?
Sure, back to our 2017 targets again, hopefully 600, 500 kilos of meal, and hopefully grow the grass. That's the plan anyway.
Excellent, yeah. And just maybe when you are the fixed milk price?
Yeah, so we have about 50% milk fixed. The last 2 years it probably hasn't helped us a whole lot, but in 2016 it was a big help, all right, and no doubt there will be the milk price will go down again in the future, and hopefully it'll get us through that as well.
So would you work on that as a percentage that you would like to fix around 50%, or is this a rolling thing?
Yeah, we have been fixing a certain amount in each of the different tranches. So like we're probably going to break even, or maybe slightly below, but it'll get us through a low cost year.
But the confidence of fixing makes it more comfortable for you. Yeah. Pat?
I'm probably not going to be popular with the environmental lobby after this, but the big learning for us was palm kernel, an amazing product. Like, I suppose, from the previous question, we'd run a system where we don't have available feed space for all the cows. Everything is kept fairly compact and tight, so the palm kernel as a substitute feed turned out to be a great thing. And that we
so to be clear, you fed it out in the fields, you fed it to a trolley in the field?
Just Murphy water truck, and dumped a bucket of a tractor into it every day. And it was a sacrifice paddock that we let the cows back to during the summer. Okay. I suppose for us, Mike, that's what I'm saying, the summer wasn't really a huge issue for us, it was the spring. And as I kept saying to the lads, it wasn't that it was, I suppose it was a taxing, draining spring because it went on so long. Like, we were still doing cubicles in April, which wouldn't be something. And the farm in Westmeath, the milking facilities, or we built them halfway down the farm, so we were physically, normally this wouldn't happen, but we were bringing cows back up to cubicle sheds, walking them maybe a kilometre back up to the yards. But as I said to the lads, the only consolation we had was anything that was under our control went well. The cow was calved compactly, calves went well, we had no issues. It was just, we can't control the weather. So we made the best of it as we could to get through. And it's another hiccup on the way. Sure.
But it's probably fair to say we didn't get as bad a drier weather in our part of the country as down further south.
Sure. That's what I've seen, Michael. Like, I went home for a week. There was a couple of lads at home gone on holidays, and we weren't that busy, so I went down. And it's amazing to see some of the most productive land in the country completely like the colour of the carpet. Like, I spent a week in Kilkenny, and everything was on full feed, It was calves, in-calves and cows. And it was like us in the spring, it was just physical work, it wasn't.
And the fixed milk price?
Fixed milk price is, like everything, we would look at it as an insurance policy, and there's nobody out there going to give you insurance without charging you something for it. We'd hope to think that we were as resilient. To be honest, I fixed, Revo had a fantastic scheme at 33 cents, so we fixed at that. We haven't fixed it any other scheme.
And what percentage would you fix?
Just at the max. Well, we fixed the max, it was 10% in both places. But like that, if we think that we're capable of running without that security, it's a bit like we would have some of the borrowings fixed for 2 to 5 years, just for some bit of stability, I suppose. But we don't have that much of our milk price fixed.
Okay, we're coming to maybe towards the end, but we have one here in the middle. Yep.
Yeah. One question for each of the Pats. First of all, Pat Walsh, you were saying that you've sown monocultures on the farm over the last few years. I was just wondering, are you also monitoring the biodiversity in the soil as a result of being monocultures as opposed to multi-species? And I suppose to the other part, on the reseeding front, you've mentioned you've taken on these new farms. Do you have a specific reseeding policy for these farms, or do you just suck it and see?
Yeah, so basically, in short, no, we're not. The only information is taken is residuals are measured by Chagas during the grazing season. Dry matter production is measured, and that's pretty much it. There's a ground score taken once a year as well. So, I'm
just wondering, is the soil biodiversity an issue of not grass species but other species besides grass? I think it's what it appears to be the greater benefit for soil biodiversity. I don't know, but maybe we can discuss that later. But on the single, just grass monocultures versus different species of grass, I'm not sure you would get. I don't know. Maybe others in the audience could answer, or maybe you could. Whether you get that biodiversity in the soil, I think maybe work I saw in New Zealand, it appears that it's other, like plantain and chicory, where you get the other biodiversity in the soil. I don't know. But Pat, do you want to take the?
Yeah, sure. Reseeding policy, like as I said, when we moved to Roscommon and Mike had heard the truth with how the neighbours described the farm, it looked much like the colour of the carpet, and there had been no drought when we were there. So the whole farm in Roscommon has been reseeded since 2014, and a bit like the lads, it's nearly 90% monoculture. We would get that question when the groups come to us, why would you have gone that route? And I said, sure, we could have got all the seed and fecked it into a big cement mixer and fired it out, and we wouldn't have a clue on what was performing well. So after what we've seen, we wouldn't be running to sow too many diploids again. We've a lot of straight tetraploids that we're exceptionally happy with, and the same in the farms, we've carried that through. So we'll be sowing a lot of Aston Energy, Abergain. We will be sowing Aber-Choice, which we're happy enough. We're just finding some of the diploids very hard to get the cows to graze them out to residuals that we'd be happy with. But there's a kind of a fallacy out there. The tetraploids are open. We see no issue with them. We have no problem with them as regards ground cover anyway. As regards diversity, we have diverse pastures in Westmeath, but unfortunately it's docks, and we're trying to get rid of that diversity. But like that, I suppose Westmeath was slightly different. The farm was working when we arrived there, so the development in Westmeath was different again. We were on our penny wise, pound foolish. We made through a 10-unit double up existing parlour that was there. We were trying to develop the farm as we were going along and increasing in stock numbers. So we're with that farm, and there's no set policy. We're not reseeding 10 or 15% every year, but we're reseeding anything that we're not happy with. So, but there would be some of the existing pastures that we moved into still there.
Yeah, but I really like your question, because I think we have to start getting more conscious of what's happening under the soil as much as what's happening above the soil. And I think there's a massive correlation between those two. And sometimes I think a lot of the time we take our eye off under the soil. So I think your question is well founded, and we should have a session on that at some stage, I think. We're close to the end. Are there any other pressing questions before we draw this to a close? I found it a really fascinating. Yeah, we have one. Have we one over there? Mike, yeah.
You've both taken quite risky ways to get where you are now. What would you suggest your best way of spreading risk is?
Okay. Pat Hickey first this time.
I suppose I'd have to go back to Elaine on that. Most lads won't get married because I think they're losing half the farm, but I actually got rid of half my debt when I walked up the aisle. To be honest, on a more serious note, I suppose this is coming back to my sister this morning when she was texting me. Listen, we've had some very, very bad days, and I suppose from our own personal point of view, and I suppose that's why I couldn't emphasise enough the support we've had. Like, we had a lead poisoning issue in Roscommon in 2016, and people would ask about what the possible things that go wrong, and I suppose the issue we had with that was that it was so outside our control, and we didn't know where it was going to finish. But discussing it even with Elaine this week, in hindsight, looking back, you know, we would have had to put in a couple of calls to the lads at home, and we probably would have been okay, depending on how now it washed over. It was very quick. Anything that got sick died, and the milk tested clear, so we were able to continue on. But there was about 24 hours there where we were closed, locked up as a farm, not able to supply milk, and we weren't sure where that road was going to lead. But from the only sleepless nights we've got, I suppose, would be from animal health. So we had an IBR issue as well in year 1. So if I was a new entrant coming in and had the financial wherewithal to put in as many vaccines as we can, that's what I would say. Put your money into holding off on problems. And because especially for a startup business, if you get hit with an animal health issue in that first year or two, it can definitely put a lot of pressure on you.
Pat?
Yeah, I suppose one thing we've done is fix the milk price. That's one thing, and another thing would have been just keep the system as simple as possible. Don't be overcomplicating things, and keep everything running as smoothly as possible, I guess, is the best way to control the controllables, and let everything else worry about itself.
Okay, you have one Porrick here, and then we'll wrap up.
One to Pat Welch. Is there a direct relationship between the soil indexes and the tonnes grown? And to Pat Hickey, just what's your policy with regard to getting up your fertility on the farms you take on?
There hasn't been up to date a huge correlation between both. It's only in the last year or two that we've noticed the K go down severely, like down to index 1, but we probably have been spreading enough and putting enough slurry out to keep things ticking over, but just not to build indexes. But production-wise, it's still pretty much going as what it should be. So.
Okay, Pat Hickey.
I'd like that once we move in, we test the soil. So Roscommon would have been horrendously low. So we came back at index 1 for both P and K, and as your man said, if it could be less than 1, it was. Like that, we were doing it out of our own pockets, so it wasn't something that we rushed into. We put in whatever the 3 bags of 10 and 20 when we were seeding it. We were spreading all compounds for that first couple of years. Soil tested the following year and hadn't moved. I think we moved 4 paddocks up to index 2. So we made a conscious decision at the end of 2017. We had a bit of excess money built up, and we went out with 3 bags of 0-10-20 as we were closed just on the end of the closing period. Again with lime, we were 5 tonnes an acre low, so we've put that out in 2 spreadings the first year, and 2 years later we went with another 2 tonnes. So our peas are at a good enough stage. I suppose it's the amount of grass we're taking off. It's proven more difficult and slower than we thought to get the P's and K's up. There's no, I suppose we're in derogation anyway, but there's no pig slurry or anything out there that there's a quick fix for us. I suppose, like everybody says, it's a question of how much we're prepared to spend on it.
Okay, sorry, I'll have one more. Eamon.
If fixed milk price percentage of it, the fixed interest rate at the moment.
Aha. Yeah, I think with that we have the question is, you fix milk price, would you fix interest rates? Both of you.
I don't know, to be honest. Probably, I suppose, if you were offered it, you probably would, yeah.
And maybe some expert in the audience might like to voice an opinion on the fixed. Is this an opportune time to fix interest rates? But Pat, what do you think? I know there's a banker down the back, and there's the other one around. Still.
I call up Anne-Marie here to tell me what to do. Listen, as I said, like we have I'd say we probably have 50% of it fixed between 3 and 5 years. It's probably costing us a bit of money at the moment, to be honest. But it's like someone investing in shares. We're not sitting down at the computer every night looking at it. It does give us some security. We probably, on the next thing, we might fix half it, which will allow us, if we're in a position to pay it back a bit quicker, that we'd have the option of paying down some part of the variable.
Okay, does any of the 2 bankers in the audience want to take that question on advice on fixing rates?
I'm very conscious that we're not meant to give financial advice, but the one thing I would say about fixing interest rates is if you fix a rate, you fix it for risk and to manage risk. And often I find I deal with farmers every day, and often when a farmer fixes a rate, he fixes it to win. So he'd fix it today and then he'll ring me tomorrow to know what the rate is, to know is he winning. And that's not the reason to fix. And I'm conscious if we went back to September 2008, I was at the ploughing match, and the cost of funds, so what it was costing banks to borrow was 5.45. Today that's about 0.39. It varies between the three banks. But it really comes down to your level of risk aversion. And certainly I've seen people who fix and it's gone the other way. I suppose it's been down at that 0.39 for maybe 3 years. If you look to the 5-year fix today, so if you were to go in today and to fix 5-year money, it's about 1.1. Okay, so that would suggest that the market feels there will be some increase. Again, though, it comes back to where you lie on that risk metric, and for some people, they're willing to ride that out. So it's certainly a conversation everybody should have. Every bank has people in there, experts, that will give that advice, and you take it and, I suppose, put it in where you are in terms of your level of debt. The final comment, Mike, is just, you know, if somebody has like a $500,000 that you owe, you can fix half and leave half variable. So you can leave a foot in both camps.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks, good advice, and probably Ty, I'm sure, substantiate that. So we'd rather than going to another comment on it, we'll wrap it up. I just want to, I want you to thank them, but I want you to stay in your seat for a moment because I just want to make a couple of remarks. So I think you've heard two outstanding young farmers who chose their parents very well, and I think they're equally, I think they've done a super job. So round of applause for the two Pats. So before Tom comes in, I just want to make a couple of remarks. I cleared this with Mike Murphy last night, so it's okay. I've got his permission. There's 5 points I want you to consider when you sit down for dinner tonight. You don't have to deal with them all, but maybe 1 or 2 of these things you could have a brief discussion at your table about. First is grass-fed. At the conference in New Zealand, we had a really good presentation about the number of products around the world today that have the title grass-fed, grass-rich, nature, all those sort of things. And I really worry that it's becoming meaningless to the consumer. We know from science that there's Irish and grass-fed milk is lower in its carbon footprint and its higher health benefits. Can we, as an industry, unite to make that a really meaningful title that attaches to product? And who controls that? Who administers that title and who controls it is something that worries me, and it's something that we need to discuss, because I think in time it'll mean nothing unless we take control of that grass image. That's the first point. Second one was leadership. A lot of young people in this audience today. I heard a really, really good young farmer, a person who I would think is really suited to leadership in the industry. And he was asked a question on leadership. He said, yeah, at some stage, maybe in about 20 years' time. 20 years' time is too late. Our industry needs young, vibrant leaders. You have self-selected yourselves to be really positive people by coming to a conference with a title positive in its title. So among you are people who we need in this industry. And I really encourage more participation. This is not a comment about the people that we have currently in leadership, but it's that we need to continuously bring in vibrancy and energy, and I just really want you to deal with that as an issue, as a topic, because I really worry about that as an issue. Third point is the image of our industry. We're struggling and we're under attack from many fronts. We shouldn't challenge the individual or confront the people head on, but we should continuously promote our industry in a very positive and strong way about being really good on the fact of the benefits of our products, the image of how we farm, and do you farm in a way that you would allow anybody onto your farm any day of the year to watch anything you do? And if you can't answer that question in the affirmative, go home and examine your system. You have to be good enough to be viewed any day of the year, because you are potentially viewed any day of the year. So really, if you're not, and I know again, back you are a positively selected audience, but we need to get that message out to a wider audience as well. Next is, there's a greater division among ourselves in agriculture than we've ever had before, and that really, really concerns me. A lot of my time, an earlier part of my life, was being involved in creating a positive image about this industry. And I think dairy farmers currently are under a little bit of attack from beef farmers and others in the industry. We really do need to continuously work together as an industry to ensure that we're in this together, and that we continuously promote agriculture as a very healthy, positive lifestyle and also industry that makes a massive contribution to our respective counties, countries, and wherever we're from. So break down that division as often as you can, whenever you get the opportunity. And the last point is animal health. And delighted to hear Pat Hickey make a reference to it. Where we can do much more in animal health, and we need to. After 10 years, we've got a UNIS program up and running. And I think it's timely that we have, because early evidence suggests that the few people that were in it a couple of years ago and have gone back in now are in a worse place from the first results that are coming in from the people in the UNIS program. So I don't want to be alarmist about it, but it's timely, absolutely timely, that we've got a UNIS program up and running. On BVD, we have 30 farms still holding PIs, and we hope that we can now have the tools in place to make sure they don't hold them anymore, but we can hopefully still be out of BVD by 2020 if we can eliminate the retained PIs this year. There will be about 350 PIs born in Ireland this year. That's from a high of 14,000 when we started. And if we can get them off the farms quickly before the next breeding season, we can complete the job. But it will depend on the removal of the PIs. So we're nearly there in BVD. Yoni is just starting, and yes, the test is shocking, and yes, it's a long haul, but we have to do it. Cell check, when we started with somatic cell, nationally we're at 270 SEC, and we're at 170 now. We've got, before that, national SEC was rising at 5,000 per year. It's now dropping at about 12,000 a year. So at 170, the top 500 farms in the country this year were at 72 SEC, and they got an award for that. We have a parasite control program going with the CAF program, but the last one I want to refer to is IBR. We hope to start a national IBR eradication program within the next year or so. And evidence suggests that that'll be a long and hard battle with the industry, but we have to stop fighting among ourselves as to how we control cattle diseases, because they're costing us money. Pat said he was prepared to vaccinate for everything. Currently, you could be vaccinating for about 10 things, but we can eliminate at least 4 of those of things that you need to vaccinate for. In vaccination costs alone, 25, 30 euros a cow. So, but notwithstanding that, 50, 60 million a year benefit by not having IBR. So I just wanted to make that short pitch as to support us in what we're doing with animal health. Yes, it'll be a pain in the arse at times, but it's worth it. We have to do it. It's good for our industry, it's good for our image, and it's good for your lifestyle. Anyway, enough of there are 5 things I'd love you to talk about over dinner. Before you have the second pint, after that, you'll talk shite anyway, so it doesn't matter. Thank you very much.
He gave you plenty to talk about. I'd say it'll be dinner, breakfast, lunch, and dinner tomorrow before they get through that list. But all very important. Well said, Mike. A lot of important stuff. Okay, so that's the end of day 1. We want to thank all the people that are here just for today on Wednesday. And again, we have over 100 new people here today, so we want to thank them for coming, and hopefully they'll come again in the future. Okay, so just give you a bit of a reminder, the feedback forms. The boxes will be outside the exit doors. The farm relief survey, if you have time to fill that out, that's just on your left as you go out the door. And those who are not coming back for tomorrow, if you could just place your lanyards in the boxes as you leave as well, and the survey for the mental health, or the auction for the mental health as well. So tonight, for those of you that are going to the gala dinner, you need this to get in, okay? So that will be commencing at 7:30, and we'll either be coming in this door or the door to the left of the reception, and we'll be out there to greet you there. So that's starting at 7:30. So thank you very much for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed the first day, and we have a lot more to cover tomorrow. Thank you.